The eviction notice was printed on yellow paper. Claire noticed that first, not the words, not the 30-day deadline stamped in bold at the bottom, but the color. Yellow. Like something cheerful had been asked to carry terrible news and hadn't quite managed the transformation. She stood in the doorway of her apartment holding it, still in her coat from the grocery run, 2 bags cutting into her left arm, and she read it twice without fully understanding either time. Her daughter, Maisie, was 4 years old and currently asleep on the couch with her shoes still on, which was something Claire usually would have gently corrected. She let it go this time. She set the groceries down on the kitchen counter: crackers, peanut butter, 2 apples, a small carton of orange juice, 1 frozen lasagna, and sat at the table that wobbled on its left side because she'd never gotten around to fixing the leg. She read the notice a 3rd time. This time she understood it completely. 30 days. She was 32 years old, and she had $43 in her checking account, a job that was giving her fewer hours than a month ago. No family she felt she could call without shame tightening her chest, and a daughter sleeping on the couch with her shoes still on. She didn't cry. She thought about it. But something older than grief settled into her instead, something closer to exhaustion, the kind that lives in the bones and doesn't announce itself. It just stays. She looked at Maisie. The rise and fall of her small back. The way one hand curled near her chin like a question mark. Somewhere behind that exhaustion was a decision waiting to be made. She didn't know it yet. She didn't know that 30 days from now, she would be standing in the driveway of a house she had not seen in 21 years, holding a key her father had left her without ever saying why. Claire Whitmore had not always been the kind of woman who sat at wobbling tables trying to calculate survival. There had been a time, not long ago, though it felt like geology, when she had considered herself organized. Capable. The kind of person who color-coded grocery lists and kept a small emergency fund in a separate savings account. She had been good at planning, at looking ahead, at anticipating the next corner before she turned it. Then Marcus left. Then the pandemic slowed her hours at the dental office where she worked as a hygienist. Then the landlord sold the building to a company that raised rent by $400 and sent all communication through a portal that never loaded correctly on her phone. These were not dramatic events. That was the part nobody told you, that life's undoing was rarely one catastrophic moment. It was an accumulation of small surrenders. A missed car payment. A medical bill paid in installments that somehow kept growing. A Saturday shift that disappeared from the schedule without explanation. Maisie had been born in March, during a late freeze, in a hospital room where Claire held her for the first time and thought, "I would do anything." That feeling had not changed. It had only become harder to sustain under its own weight. Her mornings were built around her daughter. Coffee first, quiet and standing, before Maisie woke. Then breakfast, usually eggs or cereal. Sometimes just toast with peanut butter, served on the blue plastic plate Maisie preferred because it had a rabbit painted at the bottom that appeared only when the food was gone. Claire had bought it at a dollar store 2 years ago and considered it one of the better decisions of her life. She dropped Maisie at daycare at 8, worked until 3, picked her up, came home, made dinner, gave baths, read stories. Then the second shift began: bills, calls, emails, the low arithmetic of a life held together with care and very little margin. After the eviction notice, she added a new task to the evenings: searching for apartments she couldn't afford. She looked anyway, the way people sometimes do, not expecting solutions but needing to prove to themselves that they were still trying. Her mother, Patricia, lived 40 minutes south in a 2-bedroom condo with a boyfriend Claire had met only twice, both times briefly and without warmth. She had not called her mother about the notice. She couldn't explain this choice beyond saying that some help costs more than it gives, and she had been keeping a quiet ledger on that her whole adult life. Her brother, Daniel, was in Portland with his wife and their 2 dogs and a mortgage that stressed him openly at every family occasion. She loved Daniel. She would not add to his stress. There was no one else. She sat with that for a week. The absence of a next step. The calendar on her phone counting down silently, the way all technology counts, without mercy and without meaning. It was on a Thursday evening, Maisie asleep, the lasagna half-eaten in its tray, that she opened her email and found a message from a name she didn't immediately recognize: Robert Hollis. Estate attorney, Harwick, Maine. She almost deleted it. She thought it was spam. Then she read the subject line. Regarding the estate of Thomas Allen Whitmore. Her father. Dead for years now, quietly, the way he had lived, without demanding much space. She put down her fork and read. Thomas Whitmore had been the sort of father who communicated through action rather than language. He fixed things. He showed up early. He remembered the names of people you mentioned only once. He was not a man of speeches or declarations, and this had sometimes frustrated Claire when she was younger. When she wanted words to hold onto, and he gave her a replaced fuse box or a car with new tires instead. He had died of a heart attack at 68, alone in his apartment in Harwick, a coastal town in Maine where he had moved after the divorce when Claire was 11. She had visited him there over the summers, 8 summers, she counted once, each one growing shorter as adolescence arrived and friends became more important than ferry rides and old lighthouses. After 18, she visited less. After college, almost not at all. After Marcus, Maisie, the unraveling, not once. This was one of the weights she carried. Not dramatically, not with visible grief, but present the way an old injury is present, forgotten until the weather changes. She had attended his funeral. Daniel had organized it. There had been a small service, 7 people. Including the 2 of them, and a reception at the community hall in Harwick where the pastor had called Thomas, a steady and devoted member of this community, which had made Claire cry not from grief but from surprise. She hadn't known he was devoted to anything except quiet. The email from Robert Hollis explained that Thomas had left a property. A house, not his apartment, but an older house outside of town on a road called Birch Creek Lane. Claire had never heard of it. The attorney noted that the probate process had taken longer than expected due to some question about a prior lien that had since been resolved. The house was now free and clear. It was hers. She read this several times. She called the number at the bottom of the email. It went to voicemail. She left a message, her voice calmer than she felt. Then she sat with it. A house. In Maine. From a man who had never mentioned a second property in his life. Who had lived, from everything she could observe, in a modest 1-bedroom apartment and seemed entirely content there. Who had sent her birthday cards with $20 bills tucked inside until she was 31, the last one arriving 7 months before he died, the bill so crisp it seemed intentional. She looked up Birch Creek Lane on her phone. The satellite image showed a gravel road cutting through tall pines. At the end of it, or near the end, was a pale structure she couldn't quite make out. No street view. Too rural. She thought about her father driving that road. She couldn't place him there. She called Robert Hollis again the next morning. This time he answered, and he was kind and efficient and told her the house was habitable, that Thomas had maintained it himself for the last decade. That there were no outstanding utilities and that the property taxes were paid through the end of the year. He kept it very well, the attorney said. He was out there most weekends, from what neighbors mentioned. Most weekends. For how long? She didn't ask. She thanked him and wrote down the address. That evening she looked at the 30-day notice on the table. Then she looked at Maisie eating cereal for dinner, the blue plate tipped toward her, hunting for the rabbit. She made a decision. It was quiet, like most real decisions are. She gave notice to the daycare provider, a woman named Susan, who hugged her and said she hoped things settled down, and packed what mattered into the back of her 11-year-old Subaru with her rusting will well on the cracked sun visor she kept meaning to replace. Clothing. Maisie's rabbit stuffed animal. 2 boxes of kitchen items. A laundry basket of books. She left behind the wobbling table. The landlord could have it. The drive to Harwick from Boston was for hours, with one stop for gas and one stop because Maisie needed the bathroom and wanted a snack and asked 17 questions about where they were going and whether there would be a yard. Claire answered each one honestly, "I don't know. I think so. We'll see." They arrived in late afternoon. The light was October light, horizontal and golden and slightly melancholy, the kind that makes ordinary trees look significant. She followed the GPS down roads that narrowed gradually, suburban becoming rural, becoming something quieter than either, until she turned onto a gravel road lined with birch trees losing their leaves. She drove slowly. The gravel popped under the tires. The house appeared through a gap in the trees, a two-story Cape Cod style, white with green shutters, a covered porch running along the front. Small by most standards. Older. But standing without apology. She parked and sat for a moment. "Is that it?" Maisie asked. "I think so. It has a porch." "It does. Can I sit on it?" "Let's check inside first." She used the key Robert Hollis had mailed her. The lock turned easily, recently oiled, she thought, though she couldn't say why that registered. She pushed open the door into a small entryway smelling of cedar and something faintly floral she couldn't identify. Old wool and pine. The house was clean. This was the first thing that struck her. Not dusty or abandoned, but actually, genuinely clean. The kitchen counter wiped down, the floor swept, a dish towel folded on the oven handle. As if someone expected company. She stood in the center of the kitchen and turned slowly. A wood stove in the corner. A window above the sink looking onto the backyard, the yard Maisie had asked about. A square table with two chairs. A single coffee cup in the dish rack, clean and dry. Her father's cup, she thought. She didn't touch it. Maisie had already found the stairs and was calling from somewhere above that there was a room with a blue window. Claire stood in that kitchen a moment longer than was practical. Something was pressing at the edge of her understanding, something she couldn't name yet, and she let it sit there rather than reaching for it. She spent the first week simply being present. She enrolled Maisie in the local elementary school's pre-K program, a small building with a garden out front, the kind of place that had the same teacher 3 years running. She found Susan at the nearest grocery store, which was actually called Hannaford and was 20 minutes away, and she drove it twice a week in the Subaru that somehow kept running despite everything. She slept in the larger bedroom, the one that had clearly been her father's. A plain room, pine dresser, one painting of the Maine coast that she had seen before and couldn't place, a reading lamp on the nightstand. In the drawer of the nightstand, a pocket watch, a folded piece of paper, a tube of hand cream. She left those things undisturbed for several days. She began to learn the house the way you learn a language, through immersion, not by studying it but by living inside it until its patterns become familiar. The stair that creaked third from the bottom. The window in the kitchen that had to be lifted slightly before it would latch. The wood stove that heated the entire downstairs if you fed it correctly, which she learned by trial and error, and one cold night with every blanket on Maisie's bed. Neighbors came by. Not intrusively, this was Maine, but a woman named Helen from the next road brought a casserole and mentioned that she had known Thomas for 12 years. A man named Pete, who plowed the road in winter, stopped to say he'd continue plowing and to bill her father's address, and then caught himself and said he was sorry for her loss. He was a good neighbor, Pete said. What was he like, she asked. Here, I mean. In this house. Pete thought about it. Quiet. But busy. Always doing something to the place. He put in those gutters himself. He pointed. And the porch railing. He replaced all of it. Must have taken him a month of weekends. She looked at the porch railing. Solid. Even. She hadn't thought about who had built it. After Pete left, she stood on the porch and put her hands on the railing and held it. Her father's hands had shaped this. His patience. His weekends. She thought about where she had been during those weekends. Boston, mostly. Life. The accumulation of her own years. She had not called him often. She had not visited. She had sent him a photo of Maisie at 6 months, a printed one, knowing he didn't use social media, and received a card back that said, in his handwriting, "She's beautiful, Claire. You did good." She had pinned it to the fridge and eventually it had fallen behind the radiator and she hadn't retrieved it. She went back inside and opened the nightstand drawer. She unfolded the piece of paper. It was not a letter, exactly. It was a list. Written in her father's handwriting, precise, slightly left-leaning. The same handwriting she recognized from birthday cards and the labels on preserve jars she used to see in his apartment. It read, "Roof inspection, done, August water heater, replaced. March window seals, north side, done porch railing, completed electrical panel, inspected, passed insulation, attic, added, October driveway gravel, topped off second bedroom, repainted, blue." She liked blue as a kid. She stopped at that last line. She read it again. Second bedroom, repainted, blue. She liked blue as a kid, the second bedroom. Maisie's room, now, with the blue window. But Maisie hadn't existed when her father began this house. This note predated Maisie by years. She felt certain, the paper was older, the edges softened. Her. She sat on the edge of the bed with the paper in her hands. The reading lamp was on, casting its warm circle, and outside she could hear the wind moving through the birches, the sound that had already become familiar in just a week. He had painted the second bedroom blue because she had liked blue as a child. He had been preparing this house, maintaining it, repairing it, making it livable, making it ready for her. Not in response to any crisis she had shared with him, because she had shared none. But against the possibility of one. Against the possibility of need. She turned the paper over. On the back, written more recently, the ink darker, the lines slightly shakier, the way handwriting changes in later age, was a single paragraph. "Claire, if you're reading this, then you found the house. I hope it was when you wanted to and not when you had to. Either way, it's yours. I kept it up as best I could. The wood stove is reliable if you use seasoned wood. The neighbor Helen is kind. Pete Plows. The roof is good for another 10 years at least." I didn't know how to say any of this out loud, but I want you to know that I thought about you more than I was able to show. I hope the house is useful. I hope it's enough. Dad, I hope it was when you wanted to and not when you had to. She pressed the paper flat against her knee. He had known. Not the specifics, not the eviction notice, not Marcus or the reduced hours or the $43. But he had known in the larger sense that life accumulates difficulty, that a woman alone with a child might one day find herself with nowhere to go, and he had decided, quietly, without telling her. Without asking for credit, to build her somewhere. Not tell her. Build her. For how many years? She tried to calculate. The water heater had been replaced years ago, by the look of it. The attic insulation. The sealed windows. He had been preparing this house while she was living her life. While she was in college, then with Marcus, then having Maisie, then losing the ground beneath her. While she was not calling. While she was not visiting. While she was doing what people do, living forward, not looking back. And he had been here, on weekends, fixing things. She sat very still for a long time. Then she heard Maisie call from the blue room, "Mom? Can I have water?" And she stood, folded the paper carefully, put it back in the drawer with the pocket watch and the hand cream, and went down the hall to her daughter. November arrived and the birches went bare. She had settled into a routine that felt, for the first time in years, like something she had chosen rather than something she was surviving. Maisie loved the pre-K class, loved Helen next door, loved the porch in the cold mornings where she sat in her coat watching the birds at the feeder Thomas had built and Claire had refilled. She loved the blue room with an intensity that made Claire wonder if children knew more than they told. Claire found work at a dentist's office in town, 3 days a week to start, with the possibility of more in the spring. It was enough. Not comfortable, but enough, which was different from before in a way she couldn't quantify but could feel. She called Daniel one evening and told him about the house. He was quiet for a long time. He never mentioned it, Daniel said. I know. He owned it the whole time. I think so. Maybe he bought it after the divorce. I'm not sure yet. That's so, Daniel stopped. That's so him, isn't it? She hadn't thought of it that way, but yes. It was so completely her father. Not a conversation but a porch railing. Not a declaration but a painted room. She called her mother once too, briefly, and told her she had found a house. Her mother said that was good and asked if there was reliable heating, and when Claire said yes, her mother seemed genuinely relieved, and they talked for 20 minutes about nothing important. Which was the most comfortable call they'd had in years. She began to learn other things about the house. Small things her father had left in the walls of it, like a language she was slowly becoming fluent in. There were canned goods in the basement pantry, organized by type, labeled with masking tape in his handwriting. Tomatoes, beans, soup. Enough for a season, maybe more. There was a toolbox in the garage, every tool clean and in its place. A small index card taped inside the lid listing which tool was which. She thought at first it was for someone who didn't know tools, and then she realized it was for someone who would learn. It was for her. There was a binder in the kitchen drawer labeled house, contact numbers for Pete the plowman, Helen, the oil company, the electrician in town. Warranty information for the water heater and the wood stove, paper clip to receipts. Instructions for winterizing the outdoor spigots, written out step by step in the same precise handwriting. He had documented everything he knew so she wouldn't have to discover it by failing. She sat with the binder for an entire evening after Maisie was asleep, reading it the way she might read something sacred. Not for the information, though the information was useful, but for the image it conjured. A man, older, at this table, writing these pages. Thinking about her reading them. Anticipating her need without reducing her to it. He had not left the house as a message. He had left it as a provision. There was a difference, she understood now. A message says, I thought of you. A provision says, I acted on it. Her father had acted on it for years, silently. While time moved forward and they both got older and called each other less, and she thought the distance between them was mutual indifference when it had been something else entirely on his end. Not indifference. Preparation. She thought about the last time she had seen him, 2 Christmases before he died, at Daniel's house in Portland. He had been quiet that year, more than usual, and she had assumed it was age or mood or the general quietness she associated with him. He had watched Maisie, then too, stacking blocks and knocking them over with the focused attention of a man who understands that everything important takes time to build. He had not said much. He had helped with dishes. He had driven home in the dark. She had not walked him to his car. She let herself feel that now without punishing herself. He would not have wanted her to feel punished. His whole life was evidence of that. He gave without requiring the recipient to carry guilt as part of the exchange. He gave and then gave more and did not make it a ledger. The snow came in December, and Pete plowed, and the wood stove worked exactly as promised, and Maisie started drawing pictures of the house, always with a porch, always with the birch trees. Always with a yellow sun that was more honest than the one on any eviction notice. Claire put them on the refrigerator. One morning, early, Maisie still asleep, coffee in hand. Standing at the kitchen window watching snow fall on the backyard her daughter had asked about that first day, she felt something settle in her chest. Not happiness, exactly, though it was close to happiness. Something more durable than happiness. The sense that she was standing in the right place, and that the right place had been waiting for her longer than she knew. She thought of her father on a weekend in September, or November, or February, arriving at this house with a thermos and a list. Checking the roof. Adjusting the storm windows. Painting a room blue because his daughter had liked blue when she was 8 years old. Folding that note. Putting it in the nightstand drawer with his pocket watch. Where it would wait for her, for however long it needed to wait, with the patience that had always been his defining quality and which she was only now learning to recognize as love. The pocket watch, she discovered later, had belonged to her grandfather, Thomas's father, a man Claire had barely known. Thomas had carried it most of his adult life without ever mentioning it. Inside the case, barely visible, were the initials TW, for Thomas Whitmore, but also for his father before him. She cleaned it carefully and set it on the nightstand where she had found it. She didn't wind it. She left it as it was. There is a particular kind of love that doesn't speak. It doesn't announce itself or ask to be recognized. It works on weekends. It paints rooms. It keeps records and replaces water heaters and stocks pantries and writes down the name of the plowman so you won't have to figure it out in a storm. It prepares for your need before you feel it, before you even know it's coming. And then it goes quiet and waits. Claire thought about that love often in the months that followed, not obsessively, not with grief, but the way you return to a piece of music that said something you couldn't say yourself. With gratitude. With the particular softness of being understood by someone who never had the words. She wondered sometimes what her life might have looked like if she had visited more. If she had called. If she had understood earlier what he was doing in this house on all those weekends. She didn't torture herself with it. She let it be a question, open at one end, leading somewhere she didn't need to arrive at. What she knew was this: she had thought she had nowhere to go. And she had been wrong in the most quiet and extraordinary way, wrong by 21 years, wrong by a painted room and a porch railing and a binder in a kitchen drawer. Wrong in the way that makes you rethink everything you understood about being loved. How many people, she wondered, are standing in their own version of nowhere, not knowing that somewhere, already built, already waiting, already theirs. A quiet person has been preparing something for them all along?